Well, hello. Welcome to Ask the Pastor on Hope Radio 97.1 FM, KCMI Radio. We are here for another round of talking about the Messiah and looking at some messianic prophecies from the Old Testament. We've been focusing in on the book of Isaiah specifically, and today we have another passage. But first, introductions. I'm Jon Simpson from Mitchell Berean, and I'm joined today by my friends here.
I'm John Mulholland from WestWay Christian Church.
And today I'm Kiley Callaway from Northfield Church.
It's important to have a sense of humor. Hey, listen, so we're continuing this series, looking at some messianic prophecies, as I said, and focusing in on the book of Isaiah. And today we're in another passage in, what is it, Isaiah 50?
Isaiah 50, verses 4 through 9, reading from the New Living Translation. The sovereign Lord has given me his words of wisdom, so that I know how to comfort the weary. Morning by morning he wakens me and opens my understanding to his will. The sovereign Lord has spoken to me, and I have listened. I have not rebelled or turned away. I have offered my back to those who beat me, and my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mockery and spitting. Because the sovereign Lord helps me, I will not be disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like a stone, determined to do his will, and I know that I will not be put to shame. He who gives me justice is near. Who will dare to bring charges against me now? Where are my accusers? Let them appear. See, the sovereign Lord is on my side, and who will declare me guilty? All my enemies will be destroyed like old clothes that have been eaten by moths.
All right. So another passage pointing to the Messiah, revealing information to us about who Jesus was, pointing to what he would do. And in this section, part of what is being covered here, we're seeing it's being prophesied about the Messiah is the suffering he would endure.
And the obedience in the midst of that suffering. Yeah, those two things. Obedience in the midst of suffering. We talked before about offense. Mm-hmm. And we live in an offended culture.
We do.
We live in an offended culture.
Yeah.
How do you think we got here? How do you think we got to a culture that finds offense at the turnover of every stone? Like, how did we get here? I'm trying to bait Kiley into saying something, but that's not nice. How did we get here?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I'm glad you tried to bait me into it, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, to me, there's a real sense, and there's all this talk of, and the argument debates about how Christian of a nation, America ever was, and there's some re-examining of history. But I do think it's pretty clear when you look at folks who were around when this country was founded, at least the leaders, had a pretty strong sense of respecting the Bible and looking to it for direction. And what happens when you do that is you gain strength. You gain emotional strength, you gain psychological strength, because the Bible is truth. It gives you clarity as to how to understand life. When you move away from that, you all of a sudden find yourself with less substance in your life. You have fewer anchors to hold you in place in the storms of life. And personally, to answer your question, I think we've gotten psychologically weaker, emotionally weaker. We're not as mature because we just don't have the same direction that we used to have, I think. And I'm not saying everybody did.
That's what you were trying to bait me into.
No, that's not.
Conversation before that.
Actually, no, that's not. But I think, like when I was reading those verses a second ago, that very first one, because we talked about this beforehand.
Yeah.
The sovereign Lord has given me his words of wisdom, so that I know how to comfort the weary. That is a bold statement.
Yep.
To say that if and I know, I think that's in Proverbs 1, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all. Those are
beginning of knowledge.
Those are incredibly bold
Yes.
statements to make, and so I think what you're talking about, again, whether or not, whatever a Christian, whatever that whole argument is, the element of truth to that is that there was a day, and I don't mean this in the way that probably some people are going to interpret it, but there was a day where people were committed and recognized that wisdom came from an other.
Yes.
So whomever that other is, whether it's the deistic God or the sovereign Lord or whoever that other is, our culture took its cues from the recognition that there was an other.
Yeah.
And I think because we have turned away from that other, and instead we have looked inwardly and made all of those things like our identity, whatever that thing is. I'm going to be offended because I become the arbiter of truth. I become the arbiter of all of reality. So then when you confront me, you're not just confronting my idea, but you are offending. You are going at the core of my being.
Yeah.
And that's not just a outside of this building thing. That's not just those people out there who do that. I think in the church there are a lot of Christians who live under the perception of offense.
Yes.
And they've maybe Christianized that internal cue or that internal compass of you have offended me because you don't believe exactly like me. And I so that's not just an external thing. I think that's an internal thing. So that's kind of how I would answer it. Like, what went wrong? How do we become such an offended people? Because we've decided that we know what's right, we know what's wrong, and for you to judge me for anything means like I'm wrong. Like you are attacking me personally. So we live in this perpetual state. Not just non-Christians, but Christians live in this perpetual state of offense. And reading this text, I think, gives us some.
Well, Jesus this is the Messiah again. He knows the wisdom of God. He is being trained to understand God's will. Then he accepts the suffering he's going to endure. Okay, God has spoken to me. I've listened. I'm not going to rebel or turn away. So I offer my back to be beaten, my cheeks to be, and my beard pulled out. I didn't hide my face from mockery and speech. So he willingly, because he understands God's will, because he's accepted God's plan in a sense, he can walk through being disgraced, being offended, right, being treated poorly, and he has the strength not to be stopped by it. But he sets his face, okay, and he has this, he goes, I set my face like a stone. I'm determined to do God's will. So he's not going to be deterred by the fact that he's being mistreated. And too often, even Christians, and sometimes especially Christians, get offended the most because we're the most offended at being mistreated. It's like, wait a minute. God ensured and promised we would be mistreated. So if I keep my focus on Jesus, God's plan for me, then I walk through the suffering. It doesn't have to stick to me. I don't have to feel disgraced by it, because Jesus goes, hey, because the sovereign Lord held me, I'm not going to be disgraced.
Yeah, I like what you said as far as accepting the plan of God for my life. And we talked about that last session, is that the plan of God for our life is to partner with him to help restore other people. And I love how most scholars interpret Isaiah as the suffering servant. And when I give my life to Christ, I become a servant to him. And I think no matter what offense comes my way, if I'm actually living in the fear of the Lord, which you've mentioned, it's not just like I'm scared of God that I may sin and go to hell, but I revere his word, I honor his authority, I understand my position as a servant, I understand the plan that he has for me, and I become hard-headed, so to speak, like Jesus Christ, and no matter what comes my way, I'm going to endure that, because I don't want to do anything to lash back at somebody that offended me. I want to love them, I want to show them grace, and I want to try to turn their hurtful words into something that, you can't hurt me because I know who I am, therefore I know what to do, so I'm going to love you through this, and I'm going to shine the love of Jesus Christ to see you restored, to see you come to justice, and for you to begin to fulfill your mission.
Yeah, and I even think of in First Samuel, where the people are going to Samuel and they want a king, and he goes to God and he's like, the people want a king. And essentially Samuel says they're rejecting me. So if we were to bring that to 2021, I am offended because the people don't want to do what what I'm warning them, or they want to do what I'm warning them against. God, I'm offended. And God's response is just so fascinating. He's like, well, they're not rejecting you; they're rejecting me.
Yeah.
Samuel, don't make this about you. And I know we talked about beforehand. Like, I think sometimes we have this persecution complex within the church where we get upset about things that aren't real persecution. But I definitely think we have an offense complex where we take on things that we are supposedly offended by in ways that are unhealthy for us, that are just as unhealthy as people who are outside the church who bear the weight of an identity that comes from someplace other than God. We do the exact same thing, but we maybe stamp Christian on it because we're Christians or we read the Bible or whatever. And I think the question is, how do we understand that obedience has a cost, and our response is probably not to be offended by it, and just recognizing that there's a cost, and not living the offended world, the offended life that we get typically so angry when why do you got to get so mad about that? Snowflake. I don't know if that's still a phrase.
Well, it is. Yeah. And the truth is there's, it's kind of been pointed out that those individuals exist on both sides of the spectrum.
Right.
There are easily triggered and bothered people, easily offended people everywhere, okay? But it's not, they're not just delegated to one camp,
right?
Because they exist everywhere. The Jesus endured the suffering here. I like what you said. He willingly went into it, set his face like a stone to endure it because he was determined to do God's will. He was not focused on how people were going to treat him, the circumstances of his life, the things that were going to happen. You said something earlier, before we started recording, about where are we at as a people, as Christians, and are we focused on Jesus or are we distracted with all the stuff going on around us, just like everyone else? Are we getting sucked into the culture around us, or are we resistant to that? Do we have our eyes on Jesus and we're focused on him? It's going to give us strength to really point in the right direction and rise above kind of the pettiness that our world is immersed in. It's like we don't have enough to do, so we worry about every little thing, and make it into a big thing.
I like what you said about being sucked in, because I think too many Christians are being sucked in to society, and God hasn't changed his mind with sanctification of being set apart. And so instead of being sucked in, we still need to be set apart and rely on the Lord to get us through any persecution or any offense that comes our way and continue on the mission of Christ.
And I like to go back to what you talked about in the very first session of this is we think of salvation as something tangible. I think these distractions are so powerful because they are tangible.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like maybe I can't make a spiritual dent in the life of this other person, but boy, I can sure talk about my candidate, or I can talk about this particular political thing, and then I feel like I've actually accomplished something because I got something done. So that tangible thing that we want, whether it's God's kingdom coming or the tangible thing of the distraction, is attractive to us because it's something that we can accomplish in our own power. And everything that we've talked about in the session so far has been about faith and trusting in something beyond just what we can see, what we can control, and what we can experience.
It's good.
Good. Well, this has been another session of Ask the Pastor. Hope you've enjoyed it and you're benefiting from this series as we are in the Christmas season, talking about the Messiah and the passages from Isaiah that point to him and the role that he would fulfill and the person that he would be. And so we have one more session next week, and so we look forward to seeing you then when we continue this series in the book of Isaiah on the Messiah. Have a great week. God bless you.